She disguised herself as an intern to test the director, and what she heard devastated her. Rebecca Mitchell felt her heart race when she heard the deep voice of the regional director echoing through the hallway of the company she had built with so much sacrifice. For 3 weeks, anonymous reports had been reaching her about the inappropriate behavior of Marcus Harrison, and now, disguised as a temporary intern, she could finally see the truth with her own eyes. Her finger, pointed directly at his face, trembled with anger as Marcus yelled at one of the employees in the glass corridor. Rebecca hid behind a column, watching his every move through the brown hair she had darkened specifically for this secret investigation. "Do you think I'm an idiot, Barbara?" Marcus's voice cut through the air like a blade. "3 times this week you've been late, and you still have the nerve to ask to leave early today." The middle-aged woman lowered her head, her hands shaking as she held a document folder. Rebecca noticed that Barbara wore worn-out shoes and that her blouse was a little frayed at the sleeves. The salary she paid should be enough for a decent life, but something didn't seem right. "Mr. Marcus, I explained that my son is sick and—" "Your son, your mother, your grandmother. There's always a different excuse," Marcus interrupted, moving closer to the employee. "Maybe it's time you looked for a job somewhere else, where your personal responsibilities don't interfere with work." Rebecca clenched her fists. This was not the company she had dreamed of building. When she founded Mitchell & Associates 15 years ago, her vision was of an environment where people could grow professionally without sacrificing their humanity. But there she was, hiding like an intruder in her own business, discovering that her values were being trampled. The sound of Marcus's heels on the marble floor grew closer. Rebecca pretended to organize papers on her makeshift desk in the administrative department, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he could hear it. In the last 5 days working as Jennifer Collins, a 25-year-old temporary intern, she had seen and heard things that made her question everything about the company she had created. "Hey, new girl," Marcus's voice sounded behind her. Rebecca took a deep breath before turning around, forcing a nervous smile onto her face. "How are you settling in?" "Fine, Mr. Marcus. Everyone has been very polite to me." She chose the word carefully, remembering to maintain the slightly different accent she had practiced. "Polite?" Marcus laughed, but the sound held no warmth. "I hope they've been more than polite. Here we demand excellence and those who can't keep up." "Well, you saw what happens." Rebecca nodded, feigning shyness. Marcus was different from what she remembered from the few times they had met in corporate meetings. At 42, he had always been ambitious, but there was something darker in his eyes now. The impeccable suit and red tie couldn't mask an aggressiveness she didn't recall. "Jennifer, right?" He moved closer, leaning on her desk. "Where did you say you were from again?" "Austin, sir. I studied business at the State University and—" "State University," Marcus repeated with a tone of disdain that made Rebecca press her lips together. "Well, here you'll learn how things really work in the real world." When he walked away, Rebecca felt a knot in her stomach. It wasn't just the arrogance that bothered her, but the way he looked at her and the other female employees. There was something predatory in his demeanor that made her uncomfortable. During lunch, Rebecca sat with Barbara and 2 other employees in the small break room. The women spoke in whispers, as if afraid of being overheard. He wasn't like this before. Barbara absently stirred the salad she had brought from home. When Mrs. Rebecca was more present here, he behaved completely differently. "Do you know the owner?" Rebecca asked, trying to sound casual. "Not personally, but everyone knows she's an incredible woman." Barbara's eyes shone. "She built this company from scratch after going through some very tough times. She always treated the employees with respect." "What changed?" Rebecca pressed. "She became more distant in the last 2 years." Jennifer, a young woman from accounting, joined the conversation. "They say she had personal problems. Marcus took on more responsibilities and, well, it went to his head." "Personal problems." Rebecca felt her chest tighten. "Messy divorce, family troubles." Barbara lowered her voice even further. "My cousin works in the legal department at headquarters." She said it was an ugly fight over money and property. Rebecca swallowed hard. Her divorce from David had indeed been messy, especially because he had questioned the origin of some of the company's startup capital. but she hadn't imagined the employees knew such intimate details. "And does Marcus know about these things?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "He knows everything, and then some." Jennifer looked around before continuing. "He has very well-informed sources. Sometimes he comments on things about Mrs. Rebecca's life that not even we, who've worked here for years, knew." The break bell rang, and the women quickly dispersed. Rebecca stayed in the room a few minutes longer, processing what she had heard. Marcus wasn't just being a bad manager, he was collecting information about her personal life. But how? And why? Back at her station, Rebecca noticed Marcus was on the phone in his office with the door slightly ajar. She pretended to organize files nearby, straining her ears to catch fragments of the conversation. "No, not yet. I need a few more weeks to put everything together." "Yes, I know what we agreed on." "She doesn't suspect a thing." Rebecca felt a chill down her spine. Who was he talking about? And what exactly was he planning? When Marcus ended the call and left for an external meeting, Rebecca took the opportunity to observe the environment more closely. There was a palpable tension in the air that she couldn't identify when visiting the branch as the owner. People worked in silence, avoided prolonged eye contact, and seemed constantly alert. "Jennifer." The voice of Dorothy, the longest-serving secretary, startled her. "Could you help me with these files?" Dorothy was a woman in her 60s who had worked at the company since its second year of operation. Rebecca had always respected her for her dedication and efficiency, and now saw an opportunity to get valuable information. "Of course, Mrs. Dorothy." Rebecca approached the desk piled with folders. "Have you worked here long?" 15 years next month." Dorothy smiled, but Rebecca noticed a melancholy in her eyes. "I saw this company grow from when it was just a rented room downtown. You must have many stories to tell." "Many," Dorothy sighed. Mrs. Rebecca was different in those early years. She arrived early, left late, knew every employee by name. "I remember when she found out I was struggling to pay for my husband's treatment, and without me asking, she gave me an advance with no salary deduction." Rebecca felt her eyes moisten. She remembered that moment perfectly. Dorothy had never asked for help, but Rebecca had noticed the disguised desperation and hadn't hesitated to offer support. "And now?" Rebecca asked carefully. "Now she rarely shows up. Marcus says she's very busy with other business, but I have a feeling there's something more." Dorothy lowered her voice. "He has changed a lot since he took on more power. And lately—" "What's been going on lately?" "He's been asking strange questions about Mrs. Rebecca. He wants to know about old conversations, about people she knew, about decisions she made in the past, as if he's investigating the boss herself." Rebecca felt a knot form in her stomach. What kind of questions? About the early years of the company, about where the seed money came from, about her family. Dorothy hesitated. "Jennifer, do you promise not to tell anyone what I'm about to say?" "I promise. Last week, I saw Marcus going through Mrs. Rebecca's personal files, not the company files, but the folders with private documents she keeps here. When he saw me, he said he was looking for old contracts, but I know that wasn't true." Rebecca felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. The personal files she kept at the company contained extremely sensitive information about her life, including documents related to the loan she had taken from a loan shark in the company's early years. At the time, the banks didn't believe in her project, and she was desperate. She had managed to pay it all off 2 years later, but those papers still existed. "Dorothy, do you have any idea what he was looking for specifically?" "I'm not sure, but I overheard him talking on the phone about evidence that would change everything. And he mentioned something about Mrs. Rebecca's sister. Rebecca's blood ran cold. Her sister Victoria had always been a complicated subject in her life. 2 years younger, Victoria had felt wronged when Rebecca inherited the majority of their parents' assets due to her direct involvement in the family business. The relationship between them had soured completely, especially after Victoria began spreading twisted stories about how Rebecca had stolen the inheritance. Her sister? What did he say? That she had important information about Mrs. Rebecca's past. Information that could, as he said, open a lot of people's eyes. Rebecca needed to get out of there. She mumbled an excuse about not feeling well and ran to the bathroom, where she locked herself in a stall and tried to control her breathing. Marcus was investigating her past with the help of her own sister. But what exactly did they want? And how far were they willing to go? Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. When Rebecca returned to her desk, she found a stack of documents that needed to be scanned. It was tedious work that would give her time to think and, at the same time, allow her to stay close to Marcus's office without raising suspicion. Around 3 in the afternoon, Marcus returned from a meeting accompanied by a woman Rebecca couldn't see clearly through the frosted glass of the executive office. However, something about the visitor's posture and blonde hair seemed familiar. 15 minutes later, the woman left the office, and Rebecca felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach. It was Victoria. Her own sister was there in her company, secretly talking to Marcus. Victoria walked through the administrative area without looking around, but Rebecca saw her clearly. At 40, her sister maintained the same elegance that had always characterized her, but there was a hardness in her face that hadn't been there before. Expensive clothes, a designer bag, and an air of superiority that made it clear she wasn't there by chance. Rebecca forced herself to keep her head down and continue scanning, but her fingers trembled over the keyboard. What was her sister doing there? What kind of information could she have given Marcus? Jennifer. Marcus's voice made her jump. She hadn't noticed him approach her desk. Do you know anything about the history of this company? Not much, sir. She kept her eyes on the documents. All I know is the owner is successful. Successful, Marcus repeated with irony. Interesting how people can build reputations based on half-truths. Rebecca felt her blood boil, but forced herself to look confused. What do you mean? Nothing, just thinking out loud. Marcus walked away, but Rebecca felt he was still watching her. In the following days, Rebecca noticed that Marcus began making increasingly direct comments about the absent boss lady. During a team meeting, he mentioned that important changes were coming to the company. You know, I've always believed in this branch's potential. Marcus paced the conference room like a teacher before students, but lately I've noticed some decisions from headquarters don't make much sense. Rebecca, sitting in the back of the room with other interns and junior staff, noted every word. I won't go into details, but let's just say, not all that glitters is gold. He stopped and looked directly at the team. Soon you might be surprised by some revelations about this company's management. Jennifer timidly raised her hand. Mr. Marcus, is there a problem with the company? Are our jobs safe? Your jobs are safer than ever. Marcus smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. As long as you keep doing good work and remain loyal to those who truly care about you. After the meeting, Rebecca stayed in the room pretending to organize her notes while the others left. Marcus was gathering his papers when the phone rang. Hello? Yes, I know it's risky, but it's the only way. No, she doesn't suspect a thing. She's still playing the part of the perfect little intern. He chuckled softly. Victoria said more material is arriving next week. Documents that will finish off her reputation once and for all. Rebecca felt the world spin. They were talking about her. Victoria was providing materials for Marcus to destroy her reputation. But what documents could those be? 15 years of lies are finally going to come to light. Marcus continued the conversation. When everyone finds out how she really got the money to start this company, and how she deceived the partners about her true financial situation back then. Rebecca couldn't hear the rest. She left the room on shaky legs, feeling as if she were walking through a nightmare. They knew about the loan from the loan shark. Somehow Victoria had gained access to information that could not only destroy her reputation, but jeopardize the entire empire she had built. That night, Rebecca could barely sleep. Lying in her apartment, she relived every moment of the last 15 years. The loan from Mr. Anthony, a man who lent money at high interest but who, unlike dangerous loan sharks, had a reputation for honesty in his community. She had paid back every penny with interest, but she had never properly declared the origin of that seed money in the company's initial paperwork. At the time, it was a matter of survival. The banks had refused all her loan applications, and she saw her chance to realize her dream slipping through her fingers. Mr. Anthony had believed in her when no one else did, and she had honored every payment religiously. But now, 15 years later, that desperate decision from the past was being used against her. Victoria had always known about the loan because Rebecca had confided in her sister during those difficult first months. She never imagined that trust would be turned against her. The next day, Rebecca arrived at work early, determined to find out exactly what Marcus and Victoria were planning. At 7 in the morning, the company was practically empty, just a few cleaning staff and a security guard. Rebecca pretended to be organizing documents while waiting for Marcus to arrive. When he appeared at 8:30, he was accompanied by a man she didn't know, a short fellow with dark sunglasses, carrying a leather briefcase. The two went directly to Marcus's office, where they remained for almost an hour. Rebecca managed to position herself strategically near the office, pretending to organize files in a nearby cabinet. "Are the documents authentic?" She heard Marcus's voice through the slightly open door. "Completely." The stranger's voice was rough. "Your sister provided copies of all the original contracts. We have the loan receipt, the payment dates, and most importantly, the false statement she made to the partners at the time." Rebecca felt her stomach churn. What false statement? She remembered being cautious about the details of the initial capital's origin, but she didn't recall lying directly. "What about the recordings?" Marcus asked. "Your sister handed over 3 tapes, conversations from when they were still on speaking terms. In one of them, Rebecca admits to having omitted some details about where the money came from to the partners. In another, she says that if they knew the truth, they would never have entered the business." Rebecca closed her eyes. She vaguely remembered those conversations with Victoria in the early years of the company, when stress and pressure made her vent about her fears and insecurities. She never imagined her own sister was recording her private confessions. "Is that enough to destroy her reputation?" Marcus asked. "More than enough," the man laughed. "With these documents we can prove she misled investors about the origin of the initial capital. That could be framed as corporate fraud. Even if it doesn't result in a criminal case, her reputation will be ruined." "What about control of the company?" "That's where it gets most interesting." The man's voice grew more animated. "Your sister has documents that prove irregularities in the division of the family inheritance that provided part of the capital. If she can prove that Rebecca deceived her at the time of their parents' death, she can claim a larger stake in the company." Rebecca felt as if she'd been punched. Her parents' inheritance had been divided according to the will, which favored Rebecca due to her direct involvement in the family business. But Victoria had always contested that division, claiming it had been manipulated. "And you're sure we can do this without raising suspicions about our partnership?" Marcus asked. "Of course, I present the evidence as if I discovered it by chance during a routine audit. Victoria appears as a sister concerned about irregularities in the family company. You remain the responsible manager who brought the problems to light. And then?" "Then, with her reputation destroyed and the partners losing confidence, it will be easy to force a restructuring. Victoria assumes the presidency with you as executive vice president. Rebecca is left with a minority stake and no decision-making power." Rebecca had to lean on the cabinet to keep from falling. This wasn't just a matter of blackmail or personal revenge. It was a calculated move to steal her company. Marcus and Victoria had planned every detail to destroy her life and take over everything she had built. The man with the sunglasses left a few minutes later, and Marcus remained in his office making calls. Rebecca returned to her desk in a state of shock, trying to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. During lunch hour, she locked herself in the bathroom and called her personal attorney, Attorney Henry Morrison, using a prepaid phone she had bought specifically for emergencies. "Rebecca, it's good to hear your voice. How is this undercover investigation going?" "Henry, I'm in a much worse situation than I imagined. I need your help urgently." "What happened?" Rebecca told him everything she had discovered about Marcus, Victoria, and the plan to destroy her reputation and take control of the company. "Rebecca, this is very serious." Henry's voice grew tense. They might actually have the means to cause significant damage to your reputation, even if the accusations don't hold up legally. What is my real situation regarding Mr. Anthony's loan? Legally, you did nothing illegal. The loan was paid off, and you paid all taxes on the company's profits. The problem is the issue of transparency with the initial partners. What about my parents' inheritance? That's where it gets more complicated. Henry sighed. The will was clear, but if Victoria manages to prove there was undue pressure or manipulation at the time, she could have some success in contesting the division. What do you advise me to do? First, keep up the pretense until you get more information about exactly which documents they have. Second, we need to get ahead of this and prepare our defense. And third, seriously consider the possibility of confronting your sister directly. Rebecca hung up the phone, feeling more lost than before. Confronting Victoria would mean admitting she had discovered the plan, which could accelerate their actions. But continuing the charade was becoming increasingly dangerous. When she returned to the firm, Rebecca noticed unusual activity in the administrative department. Several people were whispering in small groups, and there was a palpable tension in the air. "Jennifer," Barbara approached her with worried eyes. "Have you heard what happened?" "No. What is it?" "Marcus called in the internal audit team to do a complete review of the company's files. They're going through everything, even the oldest documents." Rebecca felt her blood run cold. The internal audit was the first step of the plan. They were going to discover the irregularities and present them as if they were casual findings from a routine investigation. "Did he say why he's doing this?" "He said he received some anonymous tips about irregularities in the company's early years." Barbara lowered her voice. "Jennifer, I'm scared. If they find anything wrong, we could all lose our jobs." "Nothing will happen to you," Rebecca said with more conviction than she felt. "I'm sure everything will work out." But internally, she knew the situation was spiraling out of control. Marcus and Victoria's plan was advancing faster than she had expected. That afternoon, Rebecca saw 3 auditors circulating through the firm with clipboards and boxes of documents. One of them, a bald middle-aged man, spent a considerable amount of time examining exactly the files where she kept the documents related to Mr. Anthony's loan. At 5 in the evening, when most employees had already left, Rebecca decided to stay longer to try to find out what the auditors had found. She pretended to have overdue work and remained at her desk, watching the activity in Marcus's office. Around 6, the bald auditor entered Marcus's office carrying a thick folder. Rebecca managed to position herself near the door and hear fragments of the conversation. "We found exactly what you said we'd find." The auditor's voice was one of satisfaction. "The loan documents are all here, including the contradictory statements in the company's early records. What about the family matter?" "We have copies of the inheritance documents and the minutes from the first partnership meetings. There is clearly information omitted about the origin of part of the initial capital." "Is that enough?" "More than enough. We can prepare a report that will seriously question the current owner's integrity." Rebecca felt as if she were watching her own execution. Every word was another nail in the coffin of her reputation and her company. "When will the report be ready?" Marcus asked. 2 days. We want to make sure everything is well documented and irrefutable." When the auditor left, Rebecca remained hidden behind the column until she was sure Marcus had also left the building. Only then did she head to her desk to get her things, but was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Dorothy. "Jennifer, you're still here?" "I had a few things to finish." Rebecca forced a smile. "And you?" "I forgot my wallet." Dorothy looked around nervously. "Jennifer, can I tell you something?" "Of course. I shouldn't be saying this, but I'm very worried about what's happening here." "Why?" "Those auditors aren't from the company." Dorothy lowered her voice to almost a whisper. "I know the entire internal audit team at headquarters, and those men have never worked for us." Rebecca felt a chill down her spine. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely, and what's more, I saw Marcus handing them documents that shouldn't leave the company, personal documents of Mrs. Rebecca that she keeps in the office safe." "Dorothy, have you told anyone about this?" "Who would I tell?" Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus has too much power here. If I say anything against him, I'll lose my job, and I need this job, especially now that my husband is undergoing chemotherapy." Rebecca felt her heart tighten. Dorothy was being silently blackmailed by her own financial situation. Marcus knew she wouldn't dare report him because she desperately depended on the job. "Dorothy, if I tell you I know someone who can help Mrs. Rebecca, would you be willing to tell what you know?" Dorothy hesitated. "Jennifer, why are you asking this? You're just an intern." Rebecca took a deep breath. The moment was approaching when she would have to make a decision, continue her disguise or reveal her identity to protect her company and her employees. "Dorothy, I need you to trust me. What you just told me is very important, and it could be the key to saving not only everyone's jobs, but the company itself." "How so?" "I can't explain everything now, but I promise that if you help me, no one will lose their job because of Marcus's lies." Dorothy studied Rebecca's face for a long moment, as if trying to decipher something familiar in her features. "There's something about you that reminds me of someone," she said slowly. "Since the first day, I've had a feeling I've known you before." Rebecca felt her heart race. Was it possible Dorothy was beginning to suspect her true identity? "Dorothy, can you tell me exactly which documents you saw Marcus handing to those men?" "I saw him taking folders from Mrs. Rebecca's personal safe, documents she's always kept there since the early years of the company. And also—" Dorothy hesitated. "Also what?" "I saw him handing over some old cassette tapes that looked very old, the kind people used to record conversations 15 years ago. The tapes that Victoria had secretly recorded." Rebecca felt her stomach churn again at the thought of her private confessions being used against her. "Dorothy, where exactly is this safe?" "In her office, behind the family portrait. But only she has the combination. And how did Marcus manage to open it? That's the part that worries me the most." Dorothy's eyes darkened. "Last week I saw him talking with Mrs. Rebecca's sister. They looked very much alike. But there was something cruel in the way she spoke about her own sister." Rebecca could no longer disguise her emotion. Tears began to stream down her face, and she sank heavily into the chair. "Jennifer, what's happening? Why are you crying?" Rebecca looked at Dorothy, a woman who had dedicated 15 years of her life to the company she had built, a woman willing to risk her own job to protect the company's integrity, someone who deserved to know the truth. "Dorothy, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise to keep it a secret until I decide what to do." "I promise." "My name isn't Jennifer Collins." Rebecca took a deep breath. "I am Rebecca Mitchell, the owner of the company." Dorothy fell silent for several seconds, her eyes wide with shock. Then slowly a smile formed on her face. "I knew it," she whispered. "From the very first day, something about you felt familiar. The way you walked, how you observed everything, how you cared about the details. You were investigating Marcus, weren't you?" "I was, and I still am." Rebecca wiped her tears. "And what I've found is worse than I ever imagined." Rebecca told Dorothy everything she had discovered about Marcus and Victoria's plan. The longest-serving employee listened to every word in growing silence, her expression shifting from surprise to indignation, and finally to determination. "Mrs. Rebecca, you can't let them do this," Dorothy said firmly. "This company is the livelihood of so many people, and you are the fairest and most honest person I've ever known. Dorothy, they have evidence about decisions I made 15 years ago when I was desperate. Even though I did everything legally, the way they'll present that information could destroy my reputation. Do you think any of us care where the money came from that saved our jobs 15 years ago?" Dorothy leaned forward. "Mrs. Rebecca, you've given opportunities to hundreds of people over these years. You built a company based on human values. That's worth more than any old piece of paper. But the partners might think differently. Then it's time to remind them who really built this company." Dorothy stood up. "Mrs. Rebecca, I know exactly where Marcus keeps the documents he stole from you, and I know how to get a copy of the report they're preparing." "How?" "My grandson studies computer science. He can recover files from any computer, and I still have access to the building's security system. I can see exactly when Marcus isn't here and when we can act." Rebecca looked at Dorothy with a mixture of gratitude and admiration. That 60-year-old woman, whom she had always respected for her dedication, was revealing herself to be a courageous and strategic ally. "Dorothy, this could be dangerous for you." "Mrs. Rebecca, this company gave me dignity when I needed it most. It allowed me to care for my sick husband and raise my grandchildren. If I don't fight for it now, what kind of person would I be?" "And the other employees? Do you think they would support the truth if it came out?" "All of them," Dorothy said without hesitation. "You have no idea how many beautiful stories exist in this company, how many people you've helped without even knowing. Mark in accounting was able to finish college because you created that scholarship program. Jennifer left an abusive relationship because you guided HR to provide psychological support." Rebecca felt her eyes fill with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and renewed hope. "Then we'll fight," she said with determination. "But we have to be very careful. Marcus and Victoria are smarter and more calculating than I imagined." "Leave that to me," Dorothy smiled. 15 years working here taught me a few things about how this company really works." Over the next 2 hours, Rebecca and Dorothy carefully planned their counter-offensive. Dorothy knew Marcus's schedule, was aware of when the security guards made their rounds, and had access to systems that could provide evidence of what was really happening. The plan was risky but necessary. The next morning, Dorothy would use her access to copy the documents Marcus had stolen, and also to install discrete software on his computer that would allow them to monitor his communications. "Mrs. Rebecca, may I ask a personal question?" Dorothy said as they were preparing to leave. "Of course. Why is your sister doing this? What happened between you?" Rebecca sighed deeply. "Jealousy, resentment, greed. When our parents died, she thought she should have received a larger share of the inheritance. She always believed I manipulated her, even though that wasn't true. And later, when the company grew, she started to think she deserved a share of the profits. But she never worked here." "Exactly. Victoria has always had the view that success should be automatically shared by family, regardless of each person's effort or contribution. When I refused to give her a share she hadn't earned, our relationship turned to war. And now she wants to destroy you to take over the company." "Apparently." Rebecca shook her head. "What hurts me the most is knowing she's willing to destroy not just me, but all the jobs and dreams this company represents." "We won't let that happen," Dorothy said firmly. The next morning, Rebecca arrived at the company at the usual time, but her heart was racing. Dorothy had arrived early to execute the first part of the plan. When Rebecca saw her in the hallway, Dorothy gave a discreet signal indicating everything had gone well. Throughout the morning, Rebecca maintained her normal intern routine, but watched Marcus's every move. He seemed nervous and constantly checked his phone, as if expecting an important call. Around 11 o'clock, Marcus's phone rang. Rebecca managed to position herself near his office and overhear part of the conversation. "What do you mean delayed? We agreed it would be today. No, we can't wait any longer. She could find out at any moment. Fine, but make sure it's tomorrow without fail." When he hung up, Rebecca saw Marcus was visibly upset. Something had gone wrong with their plan, which might give her more time to prepare. During lunch, Rebecca met Dorothy in the parking lot, away from prying eyes. "I got everything," Dorothy said, discreetly handing over an envelope. "Copies of the documents he stole from you, including a list of all the files he passed to the fake auditors. And the software on his computer. Working perfectly. My grandson said we can monitor all his communications without him knowing." Rebecca opened the envelope and felt her stomach turn as she saw copies of the original contracts with Mr. Anthony, the minutes from the first partnership meetings, and worst of all, transcripts of the cassette tapes Victoria had secretly recorded 15 years ago. Reading her own words of vulnerability and fear from the past, Rebecca relived those difficult moments when she was building the company. Phrases like, "If they knew where the money really came from, they might not invest," and "I omitted some details because I was desperate," seemed much worse on paper than they had sounded at the time. "It's worse than I thought," Rebecca murmured. "Mrs. Rebecca, there's one more thing." Dorothy lowered her voice. "I found out they scheduled a meeting with the main partners for tomorrow afternoon. They're going to present the fake report and demand an immediate restructuring of the company." Tomorrow? Rebecca felt panic. That doesn't give me enough time to prepare. That's why we need to act tonight, Dorothy said with determination. Mrs. Rebecca, do you trust me? Completely. Then let me contact some people who can help us. Former employees who know the true history of the company, people who have been here since the beginning and saw how you fought to build all this. Dorothy, I don't want anyone to take risks for my sake. Mrs. Rebecca, it's not just for your sake, it's for all of us. Dorothy gently touched Rebecca's arm. This company is our family, and families protect each other. That afternoon, Rebecca noticed unusual activity among some of the longer-serving employees. Whispered conversations, meaningful looks, and a sense that something was being planned. Dorothy had mobilized her network of trust, and Rebecca realized she was not alone in this fight. Around 4 in the afternoon, Marcus received a call that left him visibly agitated. Rebecca could only catch fragments, but enough to understand that Victoria was pushing to accelerate the timeline even further. I don't understand the rush. Okay. If you think she might be suspicious, yes, we can move it up to tonight. Rebecca's heart raced. They were going to act that very night. Whatever Dorothy's plan was, it had to be executed immediately. When most employees had already left, Rebecca saw Dorothy approaching with a group of 5 people she recognized as long-time company employees. There was Mark from accounting, Jennifer from administration, Charles from legal, Anne from internal audit, and Robert from security. Mrs. Rebecca, the time has come, Dorothy said seriously. They all know who you are, and they are all here voluntarily. Rebecca looked at each of the faces around her, people she had seen grow professionally, who had contributed to the company's success, who were now willing to risk their jobs to defend it. Everyone, I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Mark stepped forward. Mrs. Rebecca, you saved my life when you gave me a chance 10 years ago. I had been unemployed for 8 months, with 2 small children and about to lose my house. And you gave me the courage to leave a marriage that was destroying me, Anne added. When you found out what was happening, you offered me psychological and legal support. Mrs. Rebecca, we all have stories like that, Charles said. The company you built changed our lives. We won't let them destroy it based on lies. Robert, the head of security, stepped closer. Mrs. Rebecca, I have the keys to all departments and access to all security cameras. We can document everything Marcus has been doing illegally. And I have access to the company's real accounting systems, Mark added. I can show exactly how every penny has been used over the years, including every payment on the loan you took out at the beginning. Rebecca felt a deep emotion welling up in her chest. These people weren't just defending their jobs, they were defending the values and integrity she had tried to instill in the company from day one. What's the plan? She asked. First, we document everything Marcus has stolen and how he violated the company's privacy and security, Dorothy explained. Second, we prepare our own presentation with the true story of the company's early years. And third, we confront him before he gets a chance to present his lies to the partners. What if he tries to fire us or retaliate? That's where the most important part comes in, Anne smiled. Charles discovered that the auditors Marcus hired are not licensed. It's corporate fraud to use fake auditors to create fraudulent reports. And I have recordings of all his conversations from the last 3 days, Robert added, including clear confessions that he planned everything with your sister to steal the company. Rebecca realized her employees had planned a counteroffensive far more sophisticated than she had imagined. They weren't just defending the company. They were documenting the crimes Marcus had committed. When do we act? Rebecca asked. Now. Dorothy looked at her watch. Marcus scheduled a meeting with the partners for 8 tonight. It's 7:15. We have 45 minutes to prepare everything and surprise him before he can execute his plan. The next 40 minutes were a controlled rush. Each person took on a specific task. Robert set up a recording system in the meeting room. Mark prepared financial statements showing the transparency and legality of all the company's operations. Anne organized the documents proving the irregularities committed by Marcus. Charles prepared the legal basis for the actions that could be taken, and Jennifer contacted the partners to inform them that there were important developments that needed to be discussed before the official meeting. Rebecca, meanwhile, prepared herself psychologically for the most important confrontation of her business life. It wasn't just about saving her reputation, but about protecting everything she had built and all the people who depended on the company. At 7:55, Marcus arrived at the company accompanied by Victoria and the man in dark sunglasses Rebecca had seen before. They looked confident, carrying briefcases, and apparently certain their victory was guaranteed. What they didn't expect was to find the meeting room already occupied by Rebecca and her team, with all the documentation organized on the table and a sound system connected that would record every word of the conversation. What? How? Marcus was visibly stunned to see Rebecca seated at the head of the table. Who are you? My name is Rebecca Mitchell. She stood up calmly. And this is my company. Victoria paled upon recognizing her sister. The man in dark sunglasses took a step back, clearly calculating an escape route. Rebecca! Victoria found her voice. What are you doing here? Protecting my company and my employees from an attempted coup orchestrated by you and by this man who was supposed to be working for me. Rebecca pointed at Marcus, who was still in a state of shock. Jennifer, Mrs. Rebecca, I can explain, Marcus began to stammer. Can you explain why you stole documents from my personal safe? Can you explain why you hired fake auditors to create fraudulent reports? Can you explain why you conspired with my sister to destroy my reputation and steal my company? We have evidence. Victoria tried to regain control of the situation. Evidence that you deceived the partners about the origin of your initial capital. Evidence that you lied about our parents' inheritance. What evidence is that? Rebecca asked calmly. The tapes. The conversations you had with me in the early years. You admitted you withheld information. Tapes you secretly recorded violating my privacy and trust. Rebecca approached Victoria. Tapes where a sister confided her fears and insecurities to the person she trusted most in the world. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you lied. I never lied, Rebecca said firmly. I was cautious with information, yes. I omitted details that could be misinterpreted, yes. But I never lied about the origin of the money, nor about how I used every cent. Charles stood up and handed a folder to Victoria. These are all the financial records from the company's first 5 years. Every payment made to Mr. Anthony is documented, with interest and everything. Every penny invested in the company is accounted for. There isn't a single irregularity. Victoria flipped through the papers with an increasingly desperate expression. What about the inheritance? She tried one last card. The inheritance was divided exactly according to our parents' will, which you and I signed in the presence of 3 attorneys, Rebecca answered. If you want to challenge that in court, that's your right. But using lies and blackmail to steal a company is not. The man in sunglasses, who had remained silent until then, tried to head for the door, but Robert blocked his path. You're not going anywhere, Robert said calmly. We have recordings of you confessing to involvement in corporate fraud and the use of forged documents. You can't arrest me. You're not police. No, but we can file a formal complaint with all the evidence we've gathered. Charles showed another folder, including your real identity and your illegal activities over the past few months. Rebecca turned her attention to Marcus, who was sitting with his head in his hands. Marcus, 15 years ago, when you came to work here, I believed in your potential. I gave you opportunities, promoted you, trusted you with important responsibilities. Why did you do this? Marcus raised his head, and Rebecca saw tears in his eyes. Because I felt invisible. His voice came out broken. You built this company and became famous, respected, successful. And I was always just the efficient employee that nobody noticed. But that doesn't justify trying to destroy everything. When Victoria came to me with information about your past, I saw an opportunity to finally be the protagonist of something, to have real power, not just responsibilities. And you were willing to destroy all these people's jobs for that? Rebecca pointed to the employees who had supported her. Marcus looked around the room, seeing the faces of the people he had worked with for years, people he had betrayed for personal ambition. I didn't think about the consequences for them. I only thought about myself. Victoria, realizing the situation was lost, tried one last offensive. Even if you have documents, even if you prove there was no crime, Rebecca's reputation can still be questioned. The partners could still lose confidence in her. What partners, Victoria? The voice of an elderly man came from the conference room door. Everyone turned to see Mr. Albert Matthews, the founding partner and company advisor, accompanied by two other senior partners. Mr. Albert, Rebecca stood up. How did you know? Barbara called me explaining there were urgent developments regarding attempted fraud at the company. Mr. Albert entered the room with a serious expression, and after hearing everything she told me, I called the other partners. We arrived 15 minutes ago and have been listening to the conversation through the sound system, said Miss Helen Taylor, another partner. We've heard enough confessions to understand exactly what was happening here. Mr. Robert Sanders, the third partner, approached Rebecca. Rebecca, in 15 years of partnership, you have never given us reason to doubt your integrity. On the contrary, you have always been transparent with us, always treated us as true partners. But what about the information regarding the initial loan? Rebecca asked. What information? Mr. Albert seemed confused. You were always clear about having used your own resources and personal loans to start the company. You never hid that from us. But I never specifically said that part of the money came from a loan shark. Rebecca, Ms. Helen touched her arm gently. Do you think that matters? You borrowed money, paid it back with interest, built a prosperous and honest company, and have always shared the profits with us fairly. What difference does it make if the money came from a bank or a loan shark? Besides, Mr. Robert Sanders added, the three of us have known about Mr. Anthony for years. What do you mean? Rebecca was confused. My dear, Mr. Anthony was my neighbor. Mr. Albert Matthews smiled. When you started paying back the loan to him, he was so impressed by your honesty and determination that he told the story to the whole neighborhood. He always said you were the most upright person he had ever met. Rebecca felt the world spin. For 15 years, she had carried the guilt and fear that her desperate decision from the past could destroy her reputation, and the partners not only already knew the story, but admired her for it. You knew and never judged me. Rebecca, what we saw was a young woman who was willing to take enormous personal risks to turn a dream into reality, Ms. Helen Taylor explained, and who had the integrity to pay back every penny, even when it meant personal sacrifices. Victoria, seeing her last hope crumble, exploded in anger. This is ridiculous. You're being fooled by her. She has always been manipulative, always managed to convince people she's a saint. Victoria, stop. Rebecca turned to her sister. Just stop. You've spent 15 years of your life feeding anger and resentment. 15 years you could have used to build your own life, your own successes. And why should I build anything when you stole everything that was rightfully mine? I didn't steal anything, Rebecca said sadly. Our parents made everything clear in the will. I received more because I was involved in the family business since I was 18. You chose a different path, and that wasn't wrong. But don't blame me for choosing a path that worked out. And now, Marcus asked in a weak voice, what's going to happen to me? Rebecca looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the ambitious man who had tried to destroy her, but the dedicated employee she had known for years. Marcus, you will be fired for just cause. That is non-negotiable. Her voice was firm, but not cruel. But I will not press criminal charges against you, provided you return all the documents you stole and sign an agreement committing not to disclose the company's confidential information. What about me? The man in sunglasses asked nervously. As for you, we will file a formal complaint for fraud, use of false documents, and attempted extortion, Charles answered. You have committed crimes we cannot ignore. Mr. Albert Matthews approached Rebecca. Rebecca, there is one thing we need to discuss. The way you handled this situation, investigating undercover, mobilizing your team, protecting the company, it shows a leadership and courage we haven't always seen before. What do you mean? You have always been an excellent manager and a person of integrity, Ms. Helen Taylor explained. But sometimes you seemed distant. as if you carried the weight of the world alone. What we saw here today was a leader who trusts her team and inspires true loyalty. These employees risked their jobs to defend you. Mr. Robert Sanders pointed to Dorothy and her team. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a person truly deserves the loyalty of others. Rebecca looked at Dorothy, Mark, Jennifer, Charles, Anne, and Robert. People who had transformed from employees into true allies, who had shown a courage and dedication that went far beyond professional duty. You risked everything for me. How can I thank you for that? Mrs. Rebecca, you don't need to thank us. Dorothy stepped forward. You gave us dignity, opportunities, hope. Defending the company was defending our own lives and dreams. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The following months were about rebuilding and renewal. Marcus was replaced by Mark, who took over as regional manager and implemented changes that made the work environment even more humane and productive. Dorothy was promoted to general supervisor, finally recognizing her fundamental contribution to the company. Rebecca established a profit-sharing program for long-term employees and created an advisory board that included representatives from all departments. The experience of nearly losing everything had taught her that a strong company needs to be built not just by a visionary leader, but by a united and committed team. Victoria tried to sue Rebecca over the inheritance division, but the case was quickly dismissed when it became clear there was no legal basis to contest such a well-documented will. After that, she disappeared from Rebecca's life and the sisters never spoke again. The man in sunglasses was convicted of fraud and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Marcus got a job at a smaller company where he started over in a junior position. Once a year, he would send a letter to Rebecca apologizing again for what he had done. But perhaps the most important change was in Rebecca herself. The experience of seeing her company almost destroyed and then saved by the love and dedication of her employees transformed her deeply. She realized she had built something much greater than she had imagined. Not just a prosperous business, but a community of people who cared for one another. A year after the events, Rebecca was in her office when Dorothy knocked on the door. "Mrs. Rebecca, there's a visitor for you." "Who is it?" "It's Barbara, remember? The employee Mr. Marcus treated poorly. She wants to thank you in person for the change that happened in the company." Rebecca smiled. Barbara had flourished under the new management, being promoted to supervisor of her department and demonstrating talents that had been stifled during Marcus's time. "Of course, send her in." Barbara entered shyly, but with a radiant smile on her face. "Mrs. Rebecca, I know you must be busy, but I needed to come here to thank you." "Thank me for what, Barbara?" "For giving me a second chance. For creating an environment where I can be myself, where I can grow professionally without fear." Barbara sat in the chair across from Rebecca's desk. "My son asked me the other day why I'm happy when I talk about work. I told him it's because I work in a place where people genuinely care about each other." "Barbara, you always had potential. You just needed opportunities to show it." "That's what you don't understand." Barbara leaned forward. "You saved not just our jobs, but our dignity. When we found out you had disguised yourself as an intern to protect us, we all realized what kind of person we were really working for. I did what any responsible person should do." "No, Mrs. Rebecca, you did what only a truly special person would do." Barbara smiled. "And now, every time I see a new intern, I wonder if it's you again, checking if we're treating everyone well." Rebecca laughed. "I promise I won't disguise myself anymore." "You don't need to. You've created a culture here where we all look out for each other. You taught by example that real leadership is about serving others, not using them." After Barbara left, Rebecca sat contemplating her words. In 15 years of business life, she had learned many lessons, but perhaps the most important had come during the most difficult times, that a company is not just a business, but a community of dreams and hopes that depend on the integrity and humanity of its leaders. She thought of Marcus, a talented man who had lost himself in ambition and resentment, and of Victoria, a sister who chose bitterness over reconciliation. But mostly, she thought of Dorothy, Mark, Barbara, and all the others who had shown that there is something more powerful than greed or hatred, loyalty based on mutual respect and shared dignity. That night, when Rebecca arrived home, she found a letter that had been delivered personally. There was no sender, but the handwriting was familiar. With a racing heart, she opened the envelope. "Rebecca, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it, but I need you to know that I've spent this past year thinking about how our lives took such different paths. You built something beautiful and meaningful, and I tried to destroy it out of pure envy. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I hope you know that I finally understand the kind of person you are and the kind of person I chose to be. I will seek help to deal with my anger and resentment. Perhaps one day I can build something positive in my own life, instead of trying to destroy what others have built. Be happy, my sister. You deserve it." The letter was unsigned, but Rebecca knew it was from Victoria. It was not a request for reconciliation, but it was, perhaps, the first step toward healing wounds that had bled for many years. Rebecca put the letter away in a special drawer, along with other important documents from her life. She didn't know if she and Victoria would ever fully reconcile, but there was hope that at least they could find peace. 2 years had passed since the events that almost destroyed the company Mitchell and Associates. The company had not only recovered, but had grown in a sustainable and responsible way. The profit-sharing program had motivated all employees, and the company had become known in the region as one of the best places to work. Rebecca was reviewing the quarterly reports when Dorothy knocked on the door with a worried expression. "Mrs. Rebecca, there's a situation that needs your attention." "What happened?" "An anonymous complaint has arrived about one of our supervisors at the Austin branch. They say he's mistreating employees and doing questionable things." Rebecca felt a familiar déjà vu. What kind of questionable things? Bullying, undue pressure, and possible personal favoritism in promotions. "Dorothy, do you think we should investigate personally?" "I think so. But this time, how about we go together? You as the official owner and me as the general supervisor. No disguises." Rebecca smiled. "I think that's an excellent idea. We've learned that transparency and honesty are always the best paths." "And Mrs. Rebecca?" "Yes?" "Thank you for teaching me that courage isn't about not being afraid, but about doing what's right even when we are afraid." Rebecca looked at Dorothy, the woman who had become not only an exemplary employee, but a true friend and advisor. "Dorothy, you're the one who taught me that. When you risked everything to defend the company, you showed me what true leadership means." As they planned the trip to Austin, Rebecca reflected on how her life had changed. She was no longer the woman who carried the weight of secrets and fears from the past. She was a leader who had learned to trust her team, to value transparency, and to understand that true strength comes from the union of people committed to common values. The experience of nearly losing everything had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. Rebecca had discovered that she didn't need to carry all burdens alone, that she didn't need to be perfect to be respected, and that shared vulnerability could create bonds stronger than any contract or corporate hierarchy. That afternoon, as she and Dorothy traveled to Austin to investigate the new complaints, Rebecca thought about how different it would be this time. There would be no disguises, no lies, no loneliness. It would be an open, transparent investigation conducted by 2 women who had learned that true strength lies in honesty and cooperation. "Mrs. Rebecca, may I ask a question?" Dorothy said while driving. "Of course." "Do you ever regret disguising yourself as an intern?" Rebecca thought about the question for a moment. "No, Dorothy. It was the only way to discover the truth about what was happening. And more importantly, it was how I discovered who my true allies really are. And now, how do you feel about everything that happened?" "Grateful," Rebecca said simply. "Grateful to have learned that I built something bigger than a company. I built a family." When they arrived at the Austin branch, Rebecca and Dorothy found a situation less dramatic than the previous one, but equally important. The supervisor was indeed abusing his authority, creating a toxic environment that was affecting productivity and employee well-being. But this time the solution came through open dialogue, training and structural changes that ensured similar problems would not be repeated. The supervisor acknowledged his mistakes, formally apologized to the employees, and committed to participating in a leadership development program. The difference was that, instead of discovering betrayal and conspiracy, Rebecca found problems that could be solved through honest communication and organizational changes. It was a confirmation that the culture she had created after the crisis was working. On the way back, Dorothy commented, "Mrs. Rebecca, it's interesting how similar problems can have completely different solutions when they are approached with honesty from the start." That's true. The crisis with Marcus and Victoria happened because there were lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Here in Austin, the problems existed, but they could be solved because everyone was willing to talk openly. Do you think Marcus could have been saved if we had approached the situation differently? Rebecca reflected on the question. Perhaps, but for that, he would have had to be willing to be honest about his feelings and ambitions. Marcus's problem wasn't just ambition, but his willingness to destroy others to get what he wanted. And your sister. Victoria is trying to change. The letter she sent me shows that at least she recognized she was wrong. That's a start. Do you have hope of reconciling with her one day? I have hope that she finds peace and purpose in her own life, Rebecca said. If that eventually leads to a reconciliation between us, it will be welcome. But I no longer depend on it for my own peace of mind. 3 months later, Rebecca received an unexpected call. Rebecca, it's me, Victoria. Rebecca's heart raced, but her voice remained calm. Hi, Victoria. How are you? Better, much better. I'm calling because I need to talk to you in person. Would you have time for coffee sometime this week? Of course, whenever you want. How about tomorrow, 3 o'clock, at that coffee shop near the park where we used to play as children? Perfect, I'll see you there. Rebecca hung up the phone with mixed feelings. There was hope, but also caution. Victoria had demonstrated a capacity for change through the letter, but Rebecca didn't know if she was ready for a full reconciliation. The next morning, she spoke with Dorothy about the meeting. Mrs. Rebecca, how are you feeling? Nervous but hopeful, Rebecca admitted. I don't know what to expect, but at least now I know I'm strong enough to handle any outcome. Would you like me to come with you? No, Dorothy. This is something I need to do alone, but thank you for offering. That afternoon, Rebecca arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes before the scheduled time. She chose a table near the window overlooking the park, where she and Victoria had spent so many happy childhood afternoons. When Victoria arrived, Rebecca was surprised by the change in her appearance. She seemed more relaxed, less tense, and there was a sincerity in her eyes that hadn't been there for years. Rebecca, thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Of course. How are you? I'm in therapy, Victoria said directly. I've spent the last 18 months working with a psychologist to understand why I became such a bitter and resentful person. And what did you discover? That I never really dealt with our parents' death. Victoria looked down. When they died, I felt abandoned and alone. And it was easier to blame you for the difference in the will than to accept that I had chosen a different path in life. Rebecca stayed silent, allowing Victoria to continue. I know the inheritance division was fair. Mum and Dad were always clear about valuing direct involvement in the business. I chose to study arts and follow my own dreams, and that wasn't wrong. But when you succeeded and I faced difficulties, it was easier to blame you than to take responsibility for my own failures. Victoria, let me finish, please. Victoria raised her hand. What I did with Marcus, trying to destroy your company, was unforgivable. I risked not just you, but all the jobs and dreams that depend on your firm. It was a cruel and selfish thing. Yes, it was, Rebecca said softly, but acknowledging that is the first step toward real change. I've gone back to school. Victoria smiled for the first time in the conversation. I'm taking a course in cultural management. I want to work with museums and cultural centers. That's wonderful. That was always your passion. It was. And I realize now that I wasted 15 years of my life on anger instead of building something positive. Victoria paused for a moment. Rebecca, I don't expect forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I am genuinely sorry and that I will never do anything to harm you or your company again. Rebecca studied her sister's face, looking for signs of manipulation or falseness, but what she saw was genuine vulnerability and sincere remorse. Victoria, forgiveness isn't something you deserve or don't deserve. Forgiveness is a choice we make for our own peace of mind. Rebecca took a deep breath. And I choose to forgive you. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Really? Really? But forgiveness doesn't mean we'll go back to how we were before. Too much has happened. Too much pain has been caused. We'll have to build a new relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. I understand. Victoria wiped her tears. Rebecca, can I tell you something? Of course. When I found out how your employees mobilized to protect you, I was very jealous. Not jealous of their loyalty, but jealous of the kind of person you've become to inspire that kind of dedication. How so? You've built something that goes far beyond a company. You've created a community where people feel valued and protected. That's a kind of success money can't buy. Rebecca felt emotion welling up in her chest. Thank you for saying that. And it made me realize that, instead of trying to destroy what you've built, I should be trying to build something positive in my own life. And you're doing that now. I'm trying, Victoria smiled. And who knows, one day maybe we could even work together on some project. Not at your firm, but perhaps something related to social responsibility or culture. I would love that, Rebecca said sincerely. The two sisters spent another hour talking, sharing childhood memories and speaking about their dreams for the future. It wasn't a complete reconciliation. That would take time and a lot of work. But it was a genuine beginning. When they said goodbye, Victoria said, Rebecca, can I ask you one last favor? What? If you ever tell this story to someone, don't paint me as an irrelevant villain. Tell the truth, that I was a wounded person who made terrible decisions, but who found a way to change. I promise, Rebecca hugged her sister. And Victoria, I'm proud of you for having the courage to change. In the months that followed, the sisters maintained regular but respectful contact. Victoria graduated in cultural management and got a job at a local museum, where she quickly stood out for her creativity and dedication. Rebecca followed her sister's progress with genuine pride. One day, Victoria called with a proposal. Rebecca, I'm organizing an exhibition on female entrepreneurship in the United States. I'd like to include the story of your company, especially focusing on the human values you implemented. Would you agree to participate? Of course, but on one condition. What? That the exhibition also tells your own story, about how a person can overcome past mistakes and build a positive future. You really want me to tell about everything I did wrong? I want you to tell about growth, redemption, and second chances. Those are stories people need to hear. The exhibition was a success, attracting hundreds of visitors interested not only in business success stories, but in human narratives of overcoming and reconciliation. Rebecca and Victoria worked together on the project, slowly rebuilding the trust and affection that had existed between them. Dorothy followed the whole process and commented to Rebecca, Mrs. Rebecca, seeing the two of you working together gives me hope that any relationship can be healed with honesty and genuine effort. It was an important lesson for me too, Rebecca replied. I discovered that carrying anger and resentment is much heavier than carrying the responsibility of forgiveness. 5 years after the events that almost destroyed the company, Rebecca was preparing a speech for a conference on business leadership. The theme was Leadership Through Adversity, How Crises Can Strengthen Organizations. Dorothy, now promoted to Executive Vice President, was helping to review the speech. Mrs. Rebecca, are you going to tell about the intern disguise? I am, but I'll focus on what I learned about the importance of being close to employees and about how crises can reveal people's true character. And about your sister, I'll say that reconciliation is possible when there is genuine remorse and a willingness to change on both sides. Do you think people will believe the story? Rebecca laughed. Dorothy, life is sometimes more dramatic than any soap opera. People will believe it because it's true, and because all of them have been through moments where they had to choose between what is easy and what is right. On the day of the conference, Rebecca took the stage to speak to an audience of 300 business owners and executives. When she finished telling her story, the auditorium fell silent for several seconds before erupting in applause. During the Q&A session, a young woman raised her hand. "Mrs. Rebecca, if you could go back in time, would you do anything differently?" Rebecca thought about the question for a moment. Perhaps I should have been more open and transparent from the beginning about my insecurities and fears. Perhaps I should have sought help from my team before reaching the point of having to disguise myself. But I don't regret fighting for the company and the values I believe in. Another man asked, "How did you manage to forgive people who tried to destroy you?" I learned that forgiveness isn't about other people. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of anger. And I discovered that some people, when confronted with the consequences of their actions, are capable of genuine change. One last question came from an older woman in the audience. What was the most important lesson from this entire experience? Rebecca smiled before answering, that true leadership isn't about having power over people, but about serving people. And that a strong company isn't built by just one visionary leader, but by a community of people who share values and support each other. When the conference ended, many people approached to speak with Rebecca personally. Several shared their own stories of business adversity and how they had found the strength to overcome them. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out, now continuing. A week after the conference, Rebecca received a letter that surprised her. It was from Marcus. "Dear Rebecca, I watched the talk you gave on leadership through adversity. A friend sent me the video link. I want you to know that your words touched me deeply. Over the last 5 years, I have worked not only to rebuild my career, but to become the kind of person I should have been when I worked for you. Today I'm the manager of a small family business, and every day I try to apply the values of honesty and respect that I learned by observing you, even though I only recognize these values after betraying them. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know that your influence remains positive even in the life of someone who disappointed you. I wish you all the success and happiness you deserve." Rebecca kept the letter with the other important correspondence of her life. It was further evidence that people can change, grow, and find redemption even after making serious mistakes. That night at home, Rebecca reflected on the long journey she had traveled since those terrible days when she discovered the conspiracy against her company. She had begun that investigation driven by the fear of losing everything she had built. She had ended up discovering that she had built something much larger and more resilient than she had imagined. The company Mitchell & Associates was not just a prosperous business, it was living proof that it is possible to create organizations based on human values, where people find not only employment, but purpose and dignity. And Rebecca was no longer the woman who carried alone the weight of secrets and fears. She was a leader who had learned the strength that comes from shared vulnerability and mutual trust. On the last Sunday of the month, as had become tradition, Rebecca hosted a lunch at the company for all employees and their families. It was a moment of celebration and strengthening of the bonds that united that business community. As she watched the children playing in the company garden and the adults chatting animatedly, Rebecca thought about how all of that had almost been lost because of greed and betrayal. But she also thought about how the crisis had revealed the true strength of that community. Dorothy approached with a smile. "Mrs. Rebecca, what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that sometimes we need to almost lose something to discover its true value." "Are you referring to the company?" "I'm referring to everything. The company, friendships, family, trust in people. When all of this was threatened, I discovered I had built something stronger than I ever imagined. And now I know the future is built one day at a time, one decision at a time, one attitude at a time." Rebecca looked around the garden. Every person here is a story of overcoming growth and hope. That is worth more than any financial profit. As the sun set over the company garden, Rebecca felt a deep peace. She had discovered that true success isn't measured only by what we build, but by how we treat people during the construction. She had learned that authentic leadership doesn't come from titles or power, but from the ability to inspire others to be the best version of themselves. The story that began with distrust and a secret investigation had transformed into a narrative of courage, loyalty, forgiveness, and renewal. Rebecca had disguised herself as an intern to test a director, but ended up discovering the very heart of her company, and found a family she didn't even know she had. And on that Sunday afternoon, surrounded by the people who had chosen to fight by her side, Rebecca understood she had created something that transcended any traditional definition of business success. She had created a place where people could grow, dream, and find dignity through honest work and mutual respect. The firm Mitchell & Associates would continue to grow and prosper, but now Rebecca knew her true legacy wouldn't be the numbers on the financial statements. It would be the transformed lives, the opportunities created, and the proof that it's possible to build organizations based on genuine human values. When the families began to say goodbye at the end of the lunch, each person who passed by Rebecca left a word of affection, an expression of gratitude, or simply a smile that conveyed everything that needed to be said. Dorothy was one of the last to leave. "Mrs. Rebecca, thank you for another wonderful Sunday. Thank you for making all of this possible, Dorothy. Without your courage that day, perhaps none of this would exist today." "Mrs. Rebecca, can I say something?" "Always. You didn't just disguise yourself as an intern to test Marcus. You disguised yourself to test yourself, to discover if you had really built what you thought you had built." Rebecca was surprised by the depth of Dorothy's observation. "How did you come to that conclusion?" "Because I've known you for 15 years. You've always had insecurities about whether you were being a good leader, if you were really making a difference in people's lives. That investigation proved to you that yes, you had built something special and true." Rebecca smiled, recognizing the truth in Dorothy's words. "You're right. I needed to know if what I believed about our company was real or just my optimistic perception. And now you know. Now I know." When Dorothy left, Rebecca was alone in the company garden, watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of gold and pink. She thought about everything she had learned during those difficult months, that true courage is doing what's right even when you're afraid, that authentic leadership is serving others instead of using them, and that the greatest victories come not from the absence of conflict, but from how we face and overcome adversity. The company she had almost lost because of greed and betrayal was now stronger than ever, not just financially, but in terms of purpose, values, and community. Rebecca picked up her car keys and headed for the exit, but stopped for a moment to look one last time at the building that housed so many dreams and aspirations. Tomorrow would be Monday, and a new week of opportunities to continue building something greater than profits and losses would begin. She had started as a businesswoman, trying to protect her business. She had emerged as a leader who discovered the true meaning of success, creating a place where people can grow, contribute, and find dignity through honest work and authentic human relationships. The story of the businesswoman who disguised herself as an intern had become much more than an investigation into mismanagement. It had become a journey of self-discovery, family reconciliation, and a renewal of faith in the human potential for growth and redemption. And as Rebecca drove home through the city's illuminated streets, she knew she had learned the most important lesson of all, that the true value of any enterprise is not measured by what we accumulate, but by what we build for others, and by the legacy of hope and dignity we leave for future generations. End of story. Now we want to know your opinion on this moving story of overcoming and forgiveness. What did you think of Rebecca's journey from discovering the betrayal to rebuilding her company based on true human values? Do you believe Victoria deserved a second chance? And which moment touched your heart the most in this narrative? Leave your sincere comments. We love hearing what our listeners think. Don't forget to leave your like if the story moved you, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that touch the heart and show that there is always hope for a fresh start.